Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to continue on with this week's theme of an excessive amount of blank, whatever the song's excessive amount is. We could have an excessive amount of layers, an excessive amount of, I don't know, volume, instruments, whatever. An excessive amount of length, I suppose. I don't think any of our songs break into like the 40, 50, 60 minute mark range this week, but it could have been something that happened. Today though, I didn't notice this until I started getting everything prepared. We've done this track before. We're going to be looking at Lightning Bolt's Dead Cowboy. It's 8 minutes long, and the last time I checked it out was 3 years ago. June of 2022. The only thing I know about it is that I mentioned it was an impressive idea with chaotic execution and that it was for the pure chaos week. So I'm expecting that today we have an excessive amount of chaos. But honestly, at this point, I don't remember anything about the song. My memory might be jogged, but I intentionally did not go back and listen to my old reaction. I'm kind of curious what I say about it today. And if you're curious, there's a link to the original. You're more than welcome to compare and contrast what I thought of it then, what I took away from it then, and what I'm going to take away from it today. Although being an excessive amount of chaos, I'm not too sure that my understanding of it is going to change much, but we'll see. Let's dive in and see what Lightning Bolts is bringing to the table today. Wild that it's only been 1 minute already. It's quite overwhelming. The subtle pitch shifting. Drummer is just about to teeter off the edge of keeping time, almost moving into pure, rhythmic noise at that point. There is this focus so far on contrasting the higher end stuff with the lower end stuff. And it feels like this narrowing of sound into an explosion of sounds. honestly, so far, I think the guitarist has a little bit of the easier side of things here. Hitting that same pitch over and over, really drilling that in. That snare on 2 and 4. There is an interesting contrast between the production of the guitar and the production of the drums as well, where the guitar is massively distorted and compressed and gritty and crunchy, and a little bit hidden behind all of that white noise, that static, where the drums are a bit clearer, although overpowered by the guitar. Okay. This was not actually too chaotic for me. I don't know if I've grown, or maybe just my ears have grown. 2022 would have been about 2 years in. Y'all would have definitely introduced me to post metal, shoegaze, a lot of highly produced guitar tones at that point. I'm surprised that I felt it was chaotic. I'm curious. I kind of want to go back and listen to my reaction now and see why I felt that way. Because honestly, this was the opposite of chaos for me. It's a lot of repetition of two instruments. It's not really chaotic in layers, it's not chaotic in ideas. The drums do get very intense at times. That can certainly lead to a chaotic element, I suppose. There are some parts in here that feel like, as I mentioned around the 2 minute mark, the drummer just kind of pushes away from being that backbeat, of being that groove, and kind of does whatever they want. And it kind of feels like the song wants to fall apart. The drummer is really bordering on that edge of keeping the rhythmic pulse and kind of doing avant garde drumming. In moments like that, sure, the song can reach a bit of a climactic peak. Sorry, a chaotic peak. Climax is another word for peak. I don't climactic peak. That is very redundant. Yeah, a chaotic peak though. But aside from that, the only other thing chaotic in here I think is the texture of everything, the production of it all, which I do think is an important part of this song. And I think it kind of points at who I was then. I still don't like production like this, but I suppose maybe over the last 3 almost years, I've come to find some sort of middle ground with noisy production like this. It is a big part of the personality of this song, though. As I mentioned, the guitars are massive. Tons of compression, tons of distortion, tons of white noise and fuzz and buzz, and you hear pretty much just as much of the texture of the instrument as you do the pitches that it's playing. It's pretty much 50-50 there. It's such a massive sound, too, taking up so much of the sound sphere that it kind of drowns out the drums as well. The drums are trying their best to balance this out, being a more of a clean sound overall, not necessarily being a raw production, but just having less compression on it. Still having a bit to give it that largeness, that boominess. It doesn't sound like a thin drum kit, but it isn't overly compressed to the point that it is creating white noise that is quite audible and felt. And there could have been a balance here, but they opted not to go in that direction for the guitars to be so much louder. It isn't to the point where you can't hear the drums, but there are certainly passages in here where I kind of wanted the drums to be a little bit louder for balance sake, but also for my own ability to listen to them. The guitars can be very large, very loud, and very overpowering at times. But it is what gives this song a sort of punky rawness to it. It is not high contrast, high compression and high distortion and tons of overdrive, not for the effect of creating a cool buzzsaw metal guitar tone, not for being a sort of overwhelming atmosphere like post metal and shoegaze like to do, where you kind of drown out the original picking and you kind of lose that attack, and it's just the reverberation of the notes themselves, the chords themselves, creating a thick, dense atmosphere. It's not really for that reason either. The guitar ends up using these elements just to create something noisy, to create something raw, to create something antagonistic. This isn't a cool guitar tone, at least not in the traditional sense. I'm sure you can listen to this and think it's cool and want to replicate it in your own work, sure. But it lacks that cool effortlessness that I think metal tends to find with their guitar tones. To me, it feels blunt. Guitar or metal tones tend to feel sharp. This feels like slamming into a wall, like post metal likes to do, but without going for that wall of sound production. It's just repeatedly swinging a blunt object rather than forming a sonic wall. It's kind of the same thing, but I think it has a very different effect at the end. This feels more akin to, rather than creating a physical presence of sound, this feels like rage, of animosity, formed into a single instrument. I think it matches what the drums are doing generally. The drums are being hit rather hard, very aggressive styles, lots of snare in here. Snare is, at least to me, one of the more aggressive parts of the drum kit. I think it's why it's used the least in most ideas. You'll find your cymbals, yeah, you can play them every single beat. Sure, your bass kick, yeah, you could do that every single beat if you like to. Snare, though, common rock patterns on snare. 1 and 3, 2 and 4. Less often than you'll hear the bass kick, less often than you'll hear cymbals. It just has a very sharp crack to it in a way that cuts through everything. It's kind of an abrasive sound when you think about it. But here we have a ton of it. Not necessarily in the realm of blast beats, though blast beats are another way of using this sound in a very aggressive way to constantly play it. But there are several sections in here where the entire rhythmic pulse will come from the snare. The syncopation of the backbeat doesn't come from the bass kick like it does in rock or jazz or R&B even. It comes from the snare also. The snare is syncopating against itself, and really isn't any volume dynamics either. It's all at triple forte. It's just hit the snare as loud as you can, as often as you can. It's an abrasive idea that doesn't come from the production like it does with the guitar, but it comes from the performance. These two create an atmosphere of aggression, as far as I can read it. A very interesting idea, too, because, sure, loud playing and tons of guitar production to craft a tone is also what makes metal feel antagonistic and aggressive to me. But something that metal does really well is also use aggressive chords and aggressive melodies and riffs too. This doesn't. Keeping with this DIY raw guitar tone here that feels less refined and more blunt than other guitar tones. The writing is also a bit blunt too. It goes in that DIY direction and presents us rather punk riffs. Very loud, very simple, coming across as just kind of strumming the guitar. You find two chords you like, strum between the two of them. Usually a lot of distance between them. We have the really low tones and then the really high chords. Sometimes these chords change, sometimes they don't. I don't want to say that the guitar part overall is simple. I will say that it does sound simpler in most parts than what the drums are playing. Granted, we had all that shred going on at the beginning of the song. That's going to take a little bit of chops. But at the end of the day, too, it also is a little sloppy, which I barely picked up on because the production really hides a lot of that. And in fact, I think playing it more sloppy, not necessarily, completely out of time, but just a little looser than, a classical guitarist would, actually benefits it. It allows these notes to kind of bleed into each other a little bit more, which you really want, given how the reverb and the compression and the overdrive they're all going to clash together to create more white noise. I've talked about this before, but anytime that you have amplification, especially overdrive, what it does is it really exacerbates your note relationships. So if you have a really stable chord, like a power chord, a root, a fifth, and an octave, it's going to sound very powerful, very stable, very strong. If you introduce tension, whatever sort of dissonance you are playing with would already be rather noticeable on acoustic instruments. It's going to dominate the sound here because it's going to take that tension, that dissonance of the notes, and amplify it too. And when you pair that with all of the compression and the white noise and the static and the humming and the fuzz and the buzz, it just creates an even denser sound, a denser texture, a denser wall on the guitar. Playing sloppy leans into an atmosphere that they're trying to craft. It actually benefits the sound of the song. I don't think this guitarist plays sloppily all the time. I think they have the chops to definitely be very precise when they need to. But at the opening of this song, just the guitar there, I don't think the drums had come in yet during that shreddy guitar solo bit. Sloppiness is actually what you want there. It's one of the few times that I think it's beneficial to a song. And from an artistic perspective, it just absolutely helps craft that section. Um, And that's interesting too, because I think that purposefully playing sloppy while being skilled not to is going to produce a very different effect than if you're not skilled enough to play this well and then you just kind of muddy your way through it. I think it's definitely going to sound bad at that point, or at least a little worse. Maybe not bad because you're still going to get part of the intended effect. Regardless, I went to this whole thing, so I wanted to say that the guitar part isn't totally brain dead. It isn't a simple idea in general. And there is a lot of linearity to it, at least, maybe very large patterns. We're going to touch on that in a second when we hit structure and composition. But for a lot of this, we just kind of jump between two chords, though. To me, a lot of this sounds easier to play than the drums, which are absolutely bonkers crazy most of the time. They either have a very fast, highly syncopated punk beat going on, or they're doing this avant-garde experimental linear melodic drumming that borders on not even having rhythmic elements to it that line up with what the guitarist is doing. It's wild. The two of them, they sort of trade off difficult sections, I suppose. The guitarist gets to play some wild shreddy stuff, and then the drummer gets to play some parts that honestly don't feel like they're benefiting the song at all, other than incorporating a lot of sounds, a lot of attacks into a small amount of time. Again, though, creating something highly abrasive, highly aggressive. It really is, I think, at the end of the day, for most of this, a texture over composition thing. Where, yeah, we can find these patterns in what they're playing, but generally speaking, how it feels to hear this is way more important than the specific notes, chords, or rhythms being played. In fact, for all I know, this is all improvised. Even if it wasn't, I don't know that I would be able to. If you gave me two unique performances of this, I don't know that I'd be able to tell them apart, at least not where I'm at right now. Maybe if I was more familiar with this studio recording, sure, another one I'd be like, oh, wait a second, that's not the same one that goes there. But just having heard it, well, now a second time, although honestly I don't really remember much of this. I mentioned at the beginning, maybe just hearing it will ring a bell. And this is certainly unique. This is something that I thought would kind of stick with me, but no, I don't really remember much of this at all. Um, but yeah, if you played me another version right this second, I don't know that I'd be able to tell it apart unless it was just drastically different, like not punk at all. When it comes to composition, though, um, like I said, there's some patterns in here. I can hear a drum part, and I'm like, okay, this is like a two bar idea, and I can sort of hear it loop over and over, but you don't get too many repetitions out of it either. And I might play it 4 times, 8 times tops, but even on 8 times, that second time through the bar of four, so 1 through 4 and then 5 through 8. That 5 through 8 might have some variation to it, a couple of new ideas, little extra parts thrown in just to spice it up a little bit compared to the last time. The drummer doesn't like to sit still on ideas, is what I'm getting at here. They're constantly moving to something new, whether it's a small change or a very large change. They don't like playing the same thing over and over. And that kind of goes even with the guitar. Even during the sections where I was like, oh, it's just contrasting a higher chord and a lower chord. Sometimes that higher chord changes. In fact, if you speed it up a lot, you might be able to see the lower chord as a pedal tone and find a melody out of the higher chords. Maybe there's a movement to them that it's too slow for me to pick up on. It takes too long for the melody itself to resolve, and so I don't really hear it in that way yet. But it could also be random chords. You just play a nice open strum and then you move on to a chord and then you play the open strum and then a different chord and you just kind of pick whatever chord you want. Again, kind of leaning into the idea that this might be all improvised. But the other idea that I find difficult to follow along with the guitar is the frequency and styles of the pattern. It isn't ever two beats, well, it usually isn't 2 beats of the low one, 2 beats of a high one, 2 beats of the low one, 2 beats of a high one. We do get that at times. But sometimes we'll get 2 beats of a low one of a high one, 5 of a low one, 3 of a high one. And it's just kind of crazy. It kind of does whatever it wants. Again, if there is a pattern, it existed on too large of a time frame for me to capture it, to notice that we've started things over again. I think it's a lot of this, me not being able to find patterns, that makes the song feel hyper linear. 8 minutes of just being loud and abrasive in a fairly contained way. None of the sections feel too drastically different from any of the others. Yeah, I might pick up a new riff basis, might pick up a new drum pattern idea that kind of sits as a foundation for all the evolution of the drum patterns going forward. But generally speaking, the texture, the timbre, the emotion, the atmosphere of the song doesn't change. I don't think the key that we're in ever changes either. It has a consistent tone overall. But I do feel like it's kind of wherever they want to go. The drummer wants to do something wild, throw it in there. And this kind of leads me to my big fascination with this. If this is all pre-composed, the sheer concept of memorizing it to play it is wild. You think of a typical rock or metal song, verse, chorus, a bridge, maybe a second bridge, maybe you have an intro that's different from all that. You're still looking at 5 riffs tops. And maybe in the realm of metal, that might even get you for a 7 to 9 minute song, even. Depending on how long your live show is. If it's an hour-long show, I mean, that's a sixth of your show already, and you only needed 5 riffs for it. With this, which feels very linear, to memorize 8 minutes of fresh new music, no way to rely on patterns. That's wild. That's intense. I don't know how often they do this either. I have memorized 15 to 20 minute shows in the past for trumpet, classical style music. Yeah, that's all linear too. Trumpet doesn't usually get ostinatos too often. We're usually given lead melody. But we also have lots of breaks too. Maybe there's a tutti, and that's just the flutes and the clarinets, and maybe, the bari sax or an oboe or something to provide a low end. The brass is not present in those moments. So I don't have to worry about that. That could be up to 20 bars of not playing at all. The guitarist and the drummer, they're the only people here though. They can't rely on anyone else to cover it for them. If this is linear, it is 8 minutes of highly complex rhythmic ideas that have to be memorized in the specific order with all of these very specific, unique rhythmic ideas. That just blows me away. It doesn't really surprise me that people do this. Y'all have shown me some wild stuff. And you're like, no, dude, they memorize this 30-minute song and they play it live the same way every night. And it's not riff based. And like, you'll show me a live show. I'm like, hey, that was just like the studio version. Like people's memories and muscle memory. And, you write your own music too. That definitely helps. It feels very natural for you to play it because it's the type of music you would write. I mean, that definitely helps in ways. But it still kind of blows my mind to think about it sometimes. And the thing is, more often than not, y'all tell me, it's all pre-composed. It isn't jam session. It isn't improvised. I'm curious about this one. If anyone knows, let me know. Other than that, though, I don't have a lot to add to this. This is more of a feeling and atmosphere song to me more than anything else. The composition is interesting at times, but also difficult to follow or pick up through a first time listen. And well, overall, it's a sound I'm not a big fan of. I get it, I appreciate it, but especially by towards the end of the song, I think you noticed I was kind of ready for it to be over. It felt very repetitive by that point, and I really feel like they stay in sections for a long time, which is wild because it feels like everything's constantly evolving, but nothing changes. And that's an interesting idea to write too, whether that was intentional or not. Maybe they felt that this was perfectly paced, but for me, it drags despite its energy, despite its tempo, despite my inability to find the patterns of the overall phrasings if they exist. I still found it to be a lot of the same thing over and over. And yeah, I definitely reached the point where I was like, I get it. You're angry. You're playing crazy abrasive music. Do you have something else to say though? And the song doesn't ever really go in that direction. You really have to be here for the atmosphere of it to really enjoy what they're laying down at minute one because that doesn't change. And I wasn't really here for that. It was very interesting the first few minutes. I was certainly less engaged the last few minutes. Let me dive into some lyrics here, see what's going on. And the lyrics do ring a bell. This is an anti-Bush song. George W. Bush, actually, I'm going to put it that way. I'm pretty sure. When did this come out? Oh, yeah, definitely. George W. Bush. Um, and it's about his war in the Middle East. It says, take George Bush to Afghanistan. He's going to bathe in a river of blood. He wants to party till the wheels fall off. Take him to Afghanistan, throw him in an oil pit, 6 feet deep and 6 feet wide. We're going to cook him till his ears fall off. Talking about how there's a theory that America really only went to war in the 2000s for oil. And a conspiracy theory. I'm gonna put conspiracy in front of this one. That the attack on the towers on 9/11 was an inside job that America, the government, did it so that we'd have a reason to go into the Middle East. So I think they're leaning into that. It says that he wants his oil, and we're gonna flip that over. We're gonna use the oil to cook them instead. And it says the chorus says what the world needs is another dead cowboy. Which apparently I didn't know this. Like it kind of makes sense. There's something cowboyish about him, but apparently when he was governor of Texas, he often wore a cowboy hat, and it kind of stuck with him as far as political satire went. Political comics, they often painted him as a cowboy, especially with uh, his very intimidation-based tactics as far as global politics went. Very much acting like a cowboy in some ways. And so they're saying that the band says that they need to, you know, take care of George Bush. So, very short amount of lyrics. I honestly didn't hear any words in this at all. I don't even know where these would have fit in. But definitely an anti Bush song from the mid 2000s. And I think if this is how you feel about a person, there's definitely a lot of animosity there. There's a lot of anger there. The music fits that rather well. I guess that's all there is to say about that one. Y'all, these are my thoughts. I don't know where I was going with that. On Lightning Bolt's Dead Cowboy. Let me know what you thought of this. If there's anything that stood out to you, anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on, maybe you have your own opinion or perspective on this, please put all of that down in the comments alongside any thoughts you might have about this in general. Above the comment section in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Takes you here, you can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell, I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for this one. We do have a special selection next. Otherwise, I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. 9 p.m. UTC, as usual. Why is that so hard to say? Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.